think the hardest part about doing any of these podcasts is figuring out how to start. I never quite know what a great intro is. Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening. Do I put on my radio voice? It's always hard getting to start, but I really appreciate you listening. I appreciate you being here. I really do love the ideas and the concepts I've been emailed and the questions. I think I'm going to do a podcast coming up just to answer all of the questions I've been getting, because it's been a lot of fun. Earlier today, I shot a podcast on the history of public education to really signify the importance of it. Like, why is public education important? Why does it matter? And I hopefully I dug into some societies that you're like, oh, those are pretty cool societies. We'd like a cool society. And that showed you the importance of public education. Today, I kind of want to do the opposite. I want to get into societies, cultures that have taken a step away from public education. And so maybe we can learn a little bit about, what are the effects of not having a great public education. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. Well, let's dig in. Let's find out. I really want to start off with medieval Europe. Why? Because I don't have a lot of history on ancient civilizations that didn't have it. Most didn't have it, right? And we don't really talk a lot about those civilizations. So if you want a data point, if you want some science about ancient civilizations, well, the ones that had great education or were building great education, we know about. Samaria, China, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Greeks, the Spartans, etc. We've heard about them. So the ancient societies that didn't have great education, you just probably don't hear about them at all. All right. So we turn first to medieval Europe. And this is really after the collapse of Rome, which the collapse of Rome I know didn't happen like overnight, right? But when the Western Roman Empire fell, the Western side, it was around the 5th century, right? So we're going to kind of start with that framework for you. All right. So when it collapsed, when Rome collapsed, its infrastructure also collapsed, including its education system. So the network of Roman schools that had taught law, rhetoric, philosophy, a lot of scholars will say it vanished almost overnight. It kind of makes sense, right? The roads, ancient roads, boy, my pronunciation is horrible today. I'm sorry. The ancient roads that Rome built are still in existence today. Why? If you know anything about the roads they built, they dug them out super deep, and there was a layer of stone and concrete, and it just kept going, stacking, and they were meant to survive forever. But education was this little light butterfly, like a flower. It didn't have a road infrastructure. It had people infrastructure. It had people that had to care about educating society. And that's probably why it collapsed overnight. If all of your teachers aren't getting paid, if all of your scholars aren't being fed, they probably don't have time to educate the children. They're going to go back to trying to make money and feeding their families, right? And that's exactly what happened when Rome collapsed. There was nobody to fill that void. So in their place, Europe entered, what is historically called the Dark Ages, and literacy rates declined, and scientific progress some will say it's slow. I'll say it stopped. It probably didn't stop, but it probably did slow. And basic engineering knowledge. This is the one that really kind of is crazy. Basic engineering knowledge, like how to build aqueducts, to maintain roads, was lost in many, many regions of the world, especially the Western world. Trade routes broke down and cities depopulated. So cities were beginning to be a thing. More and more people were moving to the cities. There were jobs, there was commerce, and then it just stalled, and everybody just went back to be much more agrarian in nature. And it's funny, years ago, we visited Italy and Rome and saw, the Colosseum and all these other, buildings that had lasted. They've been around for thousands of years. The mathematics in just building the domes over some of these buildings was amazing. And all that math, all that engineering knowledge was lost for hundreds of years. That's why, you don't see a lot of great infrastructure projects for 500 years, right? So if you wanted, what's the importance of education? Well, teaching people things like math, teaching people things like algebra and how to read and write, and that the earth's not flat, pretty critical things. And because the education dissolved, we walked into the Dark Ages, right? So it's also important. It wasn't just the buildings and the infrastructure, but the economic output shrank across all of Western Europe. And it became really impossible for people to have social mobility. They really couldn't move from one area to another area. Trades suffered, and people were just trying to eke out a living. They were just trying to feed their families, right? And so knowledge became really, really focused on the privileged. And it was done by the clergy, and it was not a tool for public advancement. Okay, so because they didn't care about public advancement, the public did not advance. I know, yeah, that sounds a little silly to say, like, duh, Captain Obvious, right? I mean, you didn't focus on public advancement, and public did not advance, right? And I think what I learned from the collapse of the Roman Empire and how education just fell off a cliff, just fell off a cliff. I'm sure the aqueducts worked for a while, but it's like if you never saw the movie Idiocracy, it was you ought to go look at it, because it used to be a funny movie. Now it's like, is this really a documentary about what we're into now? People stopped focusing on education. Everybody just weren't as wise as they were before, right? So they couldn't even maintain the infrastructure the Romans had built. And so it took nearly 1,000 years before Europe saw anything like widespread schooling again. And I always think about, like, how far would we as human beings be on the technological advancement tool right now if that 1,000 years, like if you could project what we could look like in 1,000 years, you really got two paths, right? You got one that you can't even imagine. I mean, you've colonized space, cancer's been cured. I was going to talk about that nobody starves to death, but actually right now in 2025, the only people globally that have food shortage is because of political decisions, not because of a lack of food. Okay. We can dig into that later if you want to, but there's enough food to feed everybody on the planet. Like we technologically have created that. That's pretty dope. That's pretty awesome stuff, right? And it's because we've learned how to, educate people in the business of agriculture and how to plant more and do less and things like that. It's not always better necessarily, but we can feed everyone if the government's allowed it. In some countries, they don't allow it. That's why people still starve, at least according to most experts, right? And you see how that was an awesome disclaimer of mine? I was like, according to most experts, not just me. But no, that's the truth. We can feed the world. Politically, some societies choose not to. So it took almost 1,000 years to make up for that loss. Like 1,000 years. And now if you visualize our potential future right now, well, what if we went into the Dark Ages again? Well, then everything not only doesn't get stagnant and stay right where it is, it actually collapses, okay? And I think this was important. People are like, well, why don't we slow down growth? Okay, that's not what we're talking about. In Rome, everything fell off a cliff. And if we just stop providing education, boom, no more free public schools. Forget it. No more education of all our citizens. Society collapses. Because you don't have a trained workforce, so it collapses. And that's what happened during the Dark Ages. And we're still recovering from it. We could have flying cars. We'd have cancer cure, all these awesome things if we had just stayed the course. Okay, but we didn't as a society, as a people. All right, so let's fast forward a little bit. And I want to give some other examples of governments that just went away from training their population. So in the 1970s, Cambodia underwent one of the most tragic assaults on education in modern history. And this was under Pol Pot. And under Pol Pot, schools were shut down, books were burned, teachers were executed simply for educating. They didn't want anybody educated. A dictatorship doesn't want an educated workforce. They want to control you. And the less educated you are, the easier it is to control you. So hence, dictators want to limit all education. They do not want you to be smart and savvy. They just don't want it, right? So the Pol Pot regime believed that intellectuals were dangerous. Well, sure, because they're going to question you. And even wearing glasses, I better take these off. I don't want Pol Pot to get mad at me. Is even wearing glasses was a symbol of literacy, and it could just get you killed if you lived there. Think about that. I need glasses to see, but it could make me look smart and they're going to kill me. And it happened to people, right? And so an entire generation lost access to education, and the consequences for Cambodia were devastating. Cambodia's GDP just boom, went in the gutter. Its healthcare and infrastructure system, forget about it, crumbled. No healthcare. You're not seeing doctors. They weren't any doctors, right? Malnutrition, disease spread, and economic development just stalled for decades. And that's all because of the decision not to necessarily have a dictator, all right, but to destroy education. I mean, those two things went hand in hand, right? And so to this day, Cambodia still struggles with a shortage of skilled professionals, doctors, engineers, and educators. Well, people that help build society, right? I mean, like I need plumbers. I love plumbers. I love contractors. I love carpenters. I love teachers, people that help make my life easier. Maybe I can provide value to them. They can provide value to me, but they don't have those because they didn't train them for decades and they were just wiped out. So Cambodia continues to remind us that destroying education is not a cultural loss. It's just national suicide. All right. So keep that in mind. Okay. Let's go to some of our favorites. The Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, it's interesting. I didn't pull this up in this. I didn't write this in this narrative, but once again, I think I said this early in the other podcast, but you want to go see a thriving civilization. Look at pictures in the 1970s of Iran and Iraq before, different religious groups came in and got rid of education, right? And, they were a burgeoning modern society at the time, So let's talk about the Taliban. So in both its original rule, and there was really two times that the Taliban was in charge of Afghanistan, 1996 through 2001, and then after the withdrawal, the U.S. withdrawal in 2021. So there was a gap there. It was interesting as an old combat vet. I wasn't in Afghanistan. I was in Kuwait in, I guess it was 89. Wow, 90, yeah, something like that, or 89, 90, I'm getting old. And Kuwait, pretty good education system. So not like its neighbors at the time, as far as I could tell back then. But the Taliban was in charge 96 to 2001, and then after the U.S. withdrawal. And, they restricted girls from education, period. Girls were banned from secondary schools. Female teachers, bye-bye. They were removed. So we're just going to lose half of our teaching force in the United States. That would be well over half of it, I would imagine. And the schools were restricted. And from teaching girls, and any school that resisted this was attacked. All right. And so entire communities were robbed of the right to learn. I mean, they would just go and drag them on the streets and harass them, and everybody better get on board with this. Right. And the impact was really enormous on Afghanistan. The economy stagnated, especially in the rural areas where female participation in the workforce just plummeted. Right. I mean, healthcare access, especially for women, was declined. There were fewer doctors and nurses. So forget about medical care, right? Because there's not doctors and nurses. You don't want to train your population. That's what you get, right? So, and then international aid and development project had been suspended, due to these education restrictions. So it just compounding effect of it. So the gender gap in literacy still remains one of the widest in the world in Afghanistan. And this entire educational void threatens the long-term development of the entire country. I think if you watch the news, you get that it's not as developed as it should be right now. I don't like the term first world, second world, third world nations. I mean, I think that let's talk about literacy rates. Literacy rates, they are not anywhere in the top percentile. And so they're missing all these doctors and lawyers and educated professionals and carpenters and mathematicians and teachers, because they strayed away from education. All right. So, China and the Cultural Revolution. Now, remember, China, back in the ancient times, one of the first to really promote vigorous education. I mean, they were at the forefront of this for, thousands of years, right? And then they turned away from it. And this was in the mid-60s, the 1960s. And China experienced this massive cultural revolution. And it was a decade-long campaign to purge any intellectuals from society. Schools were shut down. Teachers were humiliated. They sent to labor camps. Can you imagine? Sent to labor camps because you try to teach people. Students were encouraged to denounce their educators, talking about brainwashing, right? And critical thinking was replaced with political propaganda. Think dictators again, right? So anytime when government wants to limit education, think you're trying to be controlled. They want to control you and they want to limit your ability to know things. It's funny, I probably shouldn't twist too much into religion right now, but there was a time when it was taboo to read the Bible. I mean, there were certain church groups that said, no, we'll read you the Bible. You don't need to read the Bible. And then people got to read the Bible and they could kind of make their own interpretations. Maybe their interpretations are right or wrong, but a person that wants to control you does not want you to learn. This is even true in marriages and relationships and in friendship groups. People that want you to stay dumb and uneducated, they don't want you to grow. They want to keep you right where you are in the place that you are. And this is exactly what happened in the China's Cultural Revolution, right? And the results were that they lost a generation of workers. I mean, a generation. Science and scientific knowledge just progressed very slowly. Universities were closed, research was halted. And now after Mao's death, China had to rebuild its educational system from the ground up. And, this just reminds us that education without freedom isn't education. It's really indoctrination, right? Now somebody had said to me, I was going on a rant, I think, about, the lack of education. They go, well, China doesn't do it. And China's super smart. No, China's not super smart. They steal patent ideas from smart people. And if you really want to dig into this, realize that what they do is that China buys companies, they take all the patent rights, and they keep them. And that's how they grow. I'm not saying there's not smart people in China, okay? There certainly are, but it's not because of the government. I probably won't get work out of China after this. That's all right. It's free societies where people get educated, where epiphanies happen and really awesome next generation technological advancements occurs. And China's certainly doing that now because they've started to embrace education. They're educating their population. But during the 60s and the 70s, they didn't, and they were way, 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 way behind us, right? Where we had embraced it. So something to think about. All right. So I'd like to get into Syria a little bit because this is also kind of a modern example that we can kind of see with our own eyes. And war continues to destroy public education, so that's not great. But in Syria, over 7,000 schools have been damaged or destroyed since 2011. Teachers have fled, children have been displaced, and many of these students haven't been inside of the classroom in years or maybe their entire lives, right? Now, certainly this has led to a sharp rise in child labor and early marriage. I know how you feel about early marriage. I have a 20-year-old daughter. She's too young. We're not talking about 20-year-olds. We're talking about like preteens, right? A generation just lacks in basic literacy and mathematics. And the long-term loss of human capital is going to impact Syria for decades. I mean, you don't sit around and sit at a coffee shop and go, wow, man, there's some really creative ideas coming out of Syria right now. And it's because of just the complete lack of education infrastructure in these conflict zones. And the long-term consequences are just devastating. So, war is certainly always a problem, but it wasn't war in the Middle Ages that caused the Dark Ages. I mean, war occurred, but it was the collapse of the school system. And so I think the coup de grace here is that every time a society loses public education, it loses more than just its knowledge. Oh, I'm going to sound like a hippie, but it really does lose its hope, identity. It loses its direction. And, whether or not this is through war or ideology or neglect or dismantling of education because of a dictator, it never ends well. And even if it's well-intended, state and federal legislatures in the United States, when they dismantle public education, generations are going to fall behind and the nation's going to suffer. And it's like really time to wake up about this. And so, what does this mean for us? It means that, look, we've got to really guard all public schools. Now, look, I'm not against school choice. I want to continue to indicate school choice should be a way to rise every student. But if it's only designed to benefit some, as it is in most states right now, it leaves an entire generation of people behind, which is going to totally erode civic trust and civic well, what's the word I'm looking for? Just the ability to be an active participant in society. So people are going to become a burden because of these bad decisions right now. And so we're going to have to guard against this. We're going to have to really pay attention. I hope this history lesson helped. I hope it didn't make you sad. It made me a little sad, made me a little frustrated. All right, we got a lot of work to do, man. Let's get to it. All right, thanks.